Good day, and welcome to the Great White North. Welcome. It's a beauty way to go, eh? Not really. It's February, and we just got our largest snowfall of the year here in Minnesota. Fortunately, it just makes you feel like winter's never going to end. I did decide that I wanted to put together a video that kind of goes back through the components of the 335 engine, since I haven't posted in about 3 months. Get some new content up and see if I can get myself motivated to get ready to do some more of this spring and summer. And you can see 335 and 445 are still in perfect hibernation, and that's about all there is to report. So I hope you enjoy this one. It's going to be a lot of slideshow, but it is what it is. Okay, so to begin the story of the engine teardown, we have to go back to this first picture. This was taken shortly after I separated the engine from the transmission, and that was done a month after I purchased the tractor. So this would have been late fall of 2018. Remember, this is a model year 1957. It's a Moline 335 utility, not the universal. In 1956 through 1961, only 2,500 units were built. This is a 40 horsepower, 2.7 liter, 4-cylinder gas engine. It is liquid cooled. It's 165 cubic inch displacement, and then that's one of the bigger differences with the 335 and 445. The 445, the engine displacement was a 206. So the engine block itself was a little bit smaller. However, it's just another one of those things that you couldn't tell by looking at the two of them side by side. Only thing known about it before I purchased it was that the engine was stuck. I knew it was in relatively rough shape, but that was primarily it. Alright, in this next picture you can see that we've got the inspection panels removed, so the top tappet cover is off and the side panel is off, and it was really first opportunity to look inside and see just how bad it was going to be. And after first inspection, it really didn't look bad. I didn't have the push rod ends off, so I couldn't tell what the journals looked like. After that, I removed the heads, exposing the cylinders, and it was at that point that you could tell that there was a significant amount of moisture that was sitting inside that block. So it's pretty obvious that it was going to be stuck. It just was a matter of which cylinder was it. And again, looking down in the cylinders, you can see the rust and the sediment that developed from sitting with moisture inside those cylinders. Then I removed the cylinder jugs, pistons, and the push rods and everything. And the journals actually ended up looking pretty good. So the case itself wasn't going to be a big issue. Crankshaft and the camshaft both look to be in very good shape. All of the oil lines were in good shape. I was pretty happy to see that. After the cylinder jugs were off, we were able to press out the stuck piston, which ended up being number 4. So it was the cylinder closest to the steering wheel. And after they were all out and we were able to clean them up just a little bit, we had everything laid out. Getting into the cleanup of the parts, everything was pretty much done with wire brush. I didn't sandblast anything. You've got one of the jugs up here was one of the first things that I did. And then in the process of honing the cylinder sleeves, I noticed that there was a crack that ran pretty much the entire vertical length of the cylinder sleeve. And then again, you could see it from the outside, so it went pretty much all the way through the cylinder sleeve. And that probably should have been my second clue that we had a problem with the water jacket keeping this thing cool somewhere. So it was evident that I needed to find a replacement jug. I went hunting for a new jug, and that brought me to the tractor graveyard, where I did indeed find one. And as you can see, it still had studs in the top of it. Those got removed because the heads for the 335 are held in with bolts, not studs. So those got taken off. This jug got cleaned up. I honed the sleeves and got that all prepped. From there, I moved on to the heads. You can see from this picture that there are two different color heads. Not only are they different color, but they're different style. So I believe that this darker brown one on the right-hand side was a replacement. Pretty apparent that there had been an issue with one of the cylinder heads before, and it was completely replaced. The problem is they didn't replace it with a standard cylinder head. They replaced it with a high compression cylinder head. You can tell by the grooves on the top of the right-hand cylinder head. I don't know if they had an overheating problem prior to putting the high compression head on. May have happened when they had the incident with the manifold that required the manifold to be welded all the way around. I'm not 100% sure, it's just pretty much reckless speculation, but it definitely is not the cylinder head that came standard on this tractor. I did clean up both cylinder heads. I cleaned out all the water jackets, and even through cleaning them, I wasn't able to tell with the naked eye that I had a major problem inside. Oddly enough, this high pressure head, they went through the cleanup process as well. And that's pretty much where the project stopped for the fall of 2018. Again, I didn't have a heated shop to work in, and so I had to wait until spring to get back into it. So then spring of 2019, I started getting to the point where I was getting most of the engine components completed and cleaned. You can see laid out on the table, it's all stripped and cleaned up. I also determined that I was going to use a different manifold. I was not going to reuse the manifold in the air intake, so I actually purchased a remanufactured one. If you remember back from earlier videos, and I'll put a link in to the specific video I'm talking about, but I had problems trying to get this to actually fire because this new air intake, which you can clearly see at the bottom here, had two inlet holes that didn't have plugs, and I didn't see that or notice it. And so we were losing our vacuum through those two holes. I had to eventually get plugs to put in there, and once I did, the problem was gone. There were other pieces, of course, that I couldn't use, like this water tube for the water pump. It was in really, really poor shape, very corroded. Bolts that hold the cylinder head down, you can see on the ends of them, they're all corroded away. This poor block, again, really had some moisture issues. Next, we were starting to get into the cleanup of the inspection plate, tappet cover. I painted in between the jugs with some prairie gold and got the new pipe put in. So that was complete and ready to be reinstalled. Got everything laid out as far as the upper block, everything clean, everything sorted, everything, all the nuts and bolts had been chased so that they would thread together nice and easy. I had all the hardware, everything that I needed to put that all back together. From there, I started into the actual block itself, cleaned up the journals, cleaned up the crankcase, got everything ready for reassembly. And I paused for a little bit and I built a stand for the front of the engine, knowing that when I put this together, it was A, going to be sitting on that engine stand for quite some time, and B, was going to get relatively heavy. I decided to put a support on the front of the engine stand. Once I got that all put together, it was just a matter of getting an extra man for some manpower and then picking a day and getting it all built up. Started with the installation of the jugs. From there we put the pistons in, connected the connecting rods. We then put the cylinder heads on and the tappage and valve train in, put the inspection plate back on, tappet cover back on, oil feed tube. If you're familiar with the playlist, there was a video where I had a leak at the top of that I had to fix, so I'll put a link in so you can find and watch that if you'd like. At that point, pretty much everything was roughly reassembled. The manifold, so everything got loosely assembled. I didn't torque anything. With there being two separate heads and two separate jugs, and then that manifold needing to lay flat across those heads for the gasket to adhere correctly, you have to put the manifold on, tighten it down so that those jugs can realign the way that they want to, and then you can go back through and torque the head down. And so that entire process took place, and then we went through and torqued everything to spec. And from that point, the engine itself was done and built up and ready. But before I put it under primer, I wanted to get some of the accessories and stuff cleaned up so that I could put them under primer at the same time. So the water pump and the oil bath, this was the mag shift cap that they were using for the oil bath. The oil bath itself was not in good shape, so again it warranted another trip to the tractor salvage yard, where I did pick up a new oil bath, not new but slightly used oil bath, and some other trinkets. I like to have extra things on hand just in case something rusts out or something happens. I've got it. But then we did move on to putting it under primer. I knew that it was probably going to sit for a while before I got the entire build together. And I didn't want flash rust, so I did put it under a coat of primer. Got everything taped off, all the ports and everything. Got it all sprayed in one afternoon. Really, it wasn't too bad at all. And then I pieced together some of the accessories. I started to develop a plan around what I was going to do to get the clutch plate dressed up and back in good order, and that really wouldn't take place for another few years. But this was the final state after it was all reassembled, and that's the way that it sat for 4 years. All right, at this point, we were still in 2019, later in the summer of 2019, and we started to get into the transmission, which, if any of you have followed the channel, you're probably pretty familiar with by now. But this was the very early stages of what it looked like after I had it separated and started to open it up a little bit and take a look at it. The transmission has 10 forward speeds and 2 reverse speeds. It has 10 forward speeds because it's an ampy-torque setup, and basically that gives you 5 high range and 5 low range speeds. And this is a dry clutch, so you can see the clutch department down there. Next slide's just to look at that clutch compartment along with the throwout bearing, and then that old grease line, which again, most of that is documented in a video. Here you've got the clutch pedal and that extremely long spring that was put in there, and I don't believe that that was factory. And if you go back to the video that I put this back together, I cut off about half of that bracket, bent it over. We didn't need such a long relief spring for that pedal. And then you can also see the inside of the fork housing for the transmission and whatever was living in there. A lot of cleanup needed. Here's a picture of my helper, and again, this was 5 years ago now at this point, and from some of the other videos he's been in with me more recently, you can see how much he's grown. From there, I removed the 3-point lift off the back of it, and I opened up all the inspection plates for the ampy-torque, the shift forks, and the PTO. Took a good look inside the PTO, and that's the point that I had found the bull gear that had a little bit of scraping and breakage because of having two different size tires on it. Took a look at the shift fork compartment, transmission, and then the ampi-torque. That I made some of the adjustments to the ampi-torque and the PTO clutch so that I knew that they were going to be functioning and I didn't have to actually pull them. That's part of what I didn't capture in my most recent videos. And that's pretty much what it looked like before it got put away for 4 years. From there, I wanted to talk a little bit about all of the damage that was found on this throughout the process, and then also give an update to my running theory as to how this thing ended up into the state that it is currently. So first off, all of the welds that we found as we went through this process, the first one was up here on the manifold. So right here it was welded all the way around the manifold. My original thought was that maybe they drove through an overhead door and snapped it off because the muffler came through the top. And then as we got further into the transmission, we found on the brakes, on the brake pedals, which you can't see behind this battery, but one of these brake pedals had been snapped clear in half. As we got into the front end, we found that this entire front frame had a brake here and had a brake here, and then had a bunch of steel added to the back of it to beef up the support on it, and just a ton of weld. So then, looking at those 3 points, and wondering whether maybe that all happened at one time. If it did, I just don't know how that would have happened, unless it got hit by a train or was being like craned onto a trailer and fell. The strange thing is that none of the casting was broken. This bracket right here that holds that support arm on was broken, but nothing cast-wise was broken. It also makes me wonder that when whatever took place here took place, if that wasn't when the radiator got damaged. Because remember, there was a milk can hanging off the front of this, and the upper water pump had a PVC structure built that fed into the milk can, and then the lower part of the return for the water pump was also piped into the bottom of the milk can. So I think that potentially this happened up here with the intake and the exhaust manifold. That may have damaged that back head, the head for cylinder 4 and 3. I think that's why the head got replaced with the high compression head. Okay, then I think after that point is when the damage to the radiator was done, and then they tried out their milk can thing, and ultimately I think they ran this super hot, and it overheated that new high compression head, cracked that cylinder, and that was ultimately when this tractor stopped running. All the damage that was found on the 3-point lift, and really it's the only spot that we found broken cast. So this little ear for the 3-point arm is the only spot that we found broken cast. But this entire 3-point had been broken and welded together. This arm was snapped with a weld there. This was snapped. This was snapped. One of these was snapped, and they welded on these big thick plates on each side to try to support it. And again, I don't know if that happened at the same time as all of the stuff on the front, or if this thing just experienced two really catastrophic events, or if it just was all through attrition and it just, this was a very unlucky tractor. And I'm not sure, but it's this process that's really fun, trying to go back and determine why all of this had to happen, what caused it. It's stuff that we're never going to get real answers to, but it's fun to speculate. All right, well, I hope you all enjoyed that one. Now hopefully everybody's up to speed, all the way from teardown of the engine, rebuild of the engine, and then if you go back through the playlist, bring you up to where we're at today, which was the end of the summer was the cracked head, which we now have a replacement for, and that's where we're going to pick up. All right, until next time, take your foot off the clutch. Thanks, everybody.